So let's just start right away. Maybe to begin with, to Karl Clausen. There's a question. Do you think the existing central bank instruments to regulate inflation and financial stability are effective? If not, what alternatives are there? And I would add, could CBDC or the E-krona project play a role in that?
That is a very big question. I don't think I will answer that already. It will take a while, and I'll focus on what I've talked about today. So,
okay, maybe a quick take on the current instruments that are in place.
No, I think we all. Interest rates, the traditional way we've pursued the monetary policy, we've reached some kind of lower bound. We know that. We've tried QA. If there is a big new crisis, yes, there are some challenges. I'm not sure. It's not obvious to me how a CBDC would help, but
okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the next question also related to E-krona, but basically to all CBDC approaches. How would the different monetary systems, the current system, digital currency only, but also cash, of course, be able to handle power outages and internet disconnections or malfunctions? And I've heard a talk in Frankfurt a couple of months ago from also a representative of the E-krona project, and she stated that you are actually looking for a way of transferring the money not in a digital way. So that would maybe be very interesting. So are there different possibilities to cash in order to have like a stable money when there's electricity outages, internet problems? Or is cash the only solution?
So let me say it this way: there is already solutions. It has to be electronic. If it's digital, it has to be digital, and we need some kind of electricity for that. But you can, on many of our Visa and MasterCards, we can make payments even if the card or the reader does not connect with a. You cannot necessarily check if there's money on your. You have a certain amount of credit on your, not on all cards, but some cards. Mm-hmm. So you could just imagine, okay, you have a solar panel to charge your phone, and then you have batteries or solar panels on the card reader, and as long as there is some credit facility there, you can make payments up to. Mm-hmm. Just to give an example, there are probably solutions, but.
Okay.
Involving some credit, I guess.
And any other ideas maybe on that? Or then I would continue. There's a question that has 3 upvotes. What have you learned from the Chinese e-cash system and the mobile phone WeChat? Maybe more to the technical side here.
Maybe for you then.
This works, right?
Yep.
I'm not no expert in WeChat, but what we see is that this is extremely powerful, and people that are using WeChat, this is integrated into chat, this is integrated into advertising, this is basically what Facebook is doing. And so I think it's very important to allow this innovation to happen and not to hinder it. I think that's the main thing. But then we have to think really hard about how do you secure the fundamentals of the central bank money. And I think you have to have very rigid standards and regulation, and those that are involved in that, they have to be compliant and get a license and so on. But this is, in my mind, is like aviation. Think about it. If aviation would be invented today, you know, suddenly we find out that we can build airplanes and we can fly. Everyone would agree, well, that's really dangerous. You know, you can fly in the sky and you can cross, and then you have to land in an airport and someone has to control it, right? But we don't take the policy of saying the government should run the airlines. We say the government should set the rules and the standards, how it should be done and secured. but then we let the private sector do the business. That's my basically message today, and I think it's this is something, and then the real effort should go into, okay, central banks, how are they gonna make sure that payments can go from one jurisdiction to another, because that's really a pain today if you want to be compliant. And that's why the other alternatives might be more popular, and that's why Facebook is building a coin, which is a
Libra coin.
The global coin is supposedly be a basket of currencies, because they're trying to get that away from the I guess the regulators. I don't know, but don't do that. Try to focus on how do you make payments between jurisdictions frictionless, and that's where central banks can come in. That's where the IMF can come in. That has to be solved, but the retail part is not for the...
I was just about to bring that example of Libra coin from Facebook, because yesterday I read an article of Gillian Tett in the Financial Times. I also contacted her because it was very good, and she addressed exactly that question, because of course stablecoin can either be backed by bank deposits, or it could be backed by central bank money, central bank reserves, which would make it quite comparable to a CBDC and also a lot safer. Now, Facebook wants to back it with a basket of currencies, like you said. Now, the question arises, because central banks usually don't hold a basket of currencies, how are they going to do it? So the question is already out there, I think. Should it be backed by central bank reserves? And also, how could all this be facilitated?
If I may add one point, the current directive is from 2009. This is a man-made system. It's really good. But this can, of course, be improved like everything else. So I think one of the issues that should be thought about is also the monetary policy part. And today, for example, it's not possible to transfer interest rates to the end customer. That's something that has to be thought about, because if you want to conduct monetary policy directly to the general public through a vehicle like that, you have to think about that, and that's easily done, but you have to do it through the regulation.
Oh, okay. Maybe coming back to your talk on CBDC, which would be like a 100% CBDC approach, which stands a little bit in contrast, of course, to the E-krona project or about to safe havens, which could lead to such a system you are describing. But if we had an E-krona system that is a complementary money to the bank deposits, would that actually make a difference? And which difference would it make? Would it help, for example, to liberalize banking? You stressed, for example, the disciplinating or disciplinative effects. So which effects could be there, if not transferring to 100% CBDC?
Well, I don't think it's in contrast with the idea of having a 100% CBDC, because the idea of 100 CBDC is compare the CBDC in the final stage, and that is good because you take the question of transition. But of course, when I think not in the benefits of the CBDC that are save money and liberalization. But if you think in the future, I mean in the transition, one possibility is a transition, and I ask for ideas, design of good transition. But history explains that a change of systems, not policy, as we are now in a change of system, change completely, do not work like a reform. For example, separation of powers. Montesquieu writes in 18th century and says it would be good not having in the king the executive power, the judicial power, and so on, separate, and so on and so on. Well, but historically, that idea there was not confirmed in a reform. Was many things emerged. England, United Kingdom took a sister away, the French Revolution and so on. And at the end, we have now that But then what I see very positive in E-krona and on the positions that are small steps that have very good meaning. For instance, the E-krona, for me, the most important thing is that we have now two public money that are cash and reserves in the bank central. If you don't do that, you lose one public money that is cash. Definitely. And then you have that, and you maintain that. Then the idea to having a safe money is maintained thanks to that you create a digital. And the same with the proposal that I've been amazed of the things that you have made in Netherlands. No? But that is very good because, well, it's not exactly the same, but you have safe deposits and so on. And on the other hand, because we have not mentioned, but the question of fintech, because in fact you are a fintech, no? If I understood very well, is that also it's going to help to the reform because the heart of the problem of the bank is lending, not payments. The change is important to have a safe asset. But if fintechs take out the business and initiating that, of course, is something very important because you are telling to the banks that they are losing that, they are losing profits, and then they have to change. Then that's why I think that the long-term view do not contrast with other steps that I value very much.
Yeah, and I do agree. And so what we try to do in the Netherlands to take a stepwise approach. So first we had a kind of radical monetary reform plan, and now we take a much more realistic approach maybe. So now we propose something stepwise. And what you, for instance, can do, you say first all people have a safe account till 10,000 euros. And maybe above that there's a kind of negative tax. And what you can do then, you can say then deposits are only insured for 90%. And then you get a kind of risk awareness that Michael Kumhoff, I think, explained quite clearly. You want that people are aware that lending or investing in a bank or having an account there, that there is risk in it, and that risk awareness is really fundamental for market discipline. And as long as so, you can design a gradual process to implement it, and then you will learn and have new data. And I think that is really the way to go forward. To have to develop these kind of practical steps that you have a kind of transition path how you can continue.
Next question directly to that: why would consumers use CBDC with deposit insurance still in place? So do we need a haircut rate on deposit insurance or interest on CBDC holdings to make it more attractive? Because if the bank deposit is still safe, why would you use CBDC?
It's the question is that if you don't take out the protections of the banks, you are going to have problems. I mean, it's completely... the question is why I need to protect banks. Because the need to protect banks is to have a safe asset. If you don't have, you don't need that. Then that is the question. But at the end, the question is, why do you have... You are going to have problems. All the problems that we are detecting is because that. The only way to do that is a transition to say, well, no, you have to protect bank because they need time to adapt to the market. And that's important. And I think that is very important because if you don't do a transition protecting the banks, you are very wrong because banks are doing very good things now. We need banking, and we cannot tell tomorrow that we don't need banking. We don't need banks, but we need banking, but we need banking in a competition with other multitude of lenders, and that's why we need that if we have a safe asset.
Could a different approach be to find a new definition for legal tender? Because legal tender right now is only physical cash. In Germany, there's a law case going on, and it's going to be taken to a European court as well, because the law clearly said it is a problem that physical cash is the only legal tender, and, for example, taxes cannot be paid with physical money. So would that also be a way of opening up that debate? What do you think?
Well, I think that now the rights that conserve the public, the state, are two. I mean, one is I only accept taxes, and the other is obligation should be paid in the money, no? And that, of course, should be adapted, no, to this situation, no? Because especially to the E-krona, I don't know if you have studied that, but of course you need to adapt that. Of course, if you have at least the cash and you don't ending with the cash, you could maintain that, no? But obviously you need to adapt the legal system to that.
I'll just like to add one thing. People or the legal tender is a bit more difficult, I think, than what we used to think. Would it help in Sweden if we had somehow strengthened legal tender? You would have to say, you would have to force people to, you have to pay in Swedish krona, Swedish E-krona or something. What is happening here is that people find other ways of paying are easier, better. I think the core is that you have to make sure what kind of the currency that you want to define the unit of account in your country has to. You have to, as a central bank, you have to make sure that's so attractive that that's what people want to use in that. And legal tender, it might help, but there is something else you have to focus on.
So I guess the technology behind the payment system is, in these days, the driving factor. When I think of PayPal, when I think of Alipay with WeChat, when I think of Google Pay, everybody swipes cards, Apple Pay, now comes Facebook Coin. So I think this is basically the main driver. So how is basically, or how is also the E-krona project or the whole movement maybe, going back to your argument, John, included in that technical idea? How would a central bank compete with a nice technical way to provide new money if this is basically the only thing everybody cares of? Or cares about?
Well, I mean, as I said, I would like to just to make this distinction between what we can call a retail client and a wholesale client. So the central bank digital currency should apply to financial regulated institutions to make sure that the real thing is backing the whole thing. If you would be using e-money, for example, but with regards to legal tender, I'm going to leave that out to others that are more familiar with that subject. But I think, as I said, I don't think the central banks should compete in the retail market. It should focus on what we can call the wholesale market.
Yeah, maybe one remark about legal tender. So what works in general very well with politicians, if you ask them how is it possible that you cannot pay with legal tender in the Dutch parliament? So you can only pay with bank money, and the same at universities in the Netherlands or in buses or in trams. So public institutions are not accepting legal tender, and that's, I think, a strange thing. So that debate you can easily have, and also politicians immediately understand then the problem, and then there is a kind of awareness. So that's what we are doing, at least also in the Netherlands, raising that question.
Yes, but isn't it wonderful? We just started to issue E-krona in Iceland yesterday. It's called the Iceland E-krona. And the legislation is there, has been there for 20 years, and we didn't need to speak to any politician. That's wonderful.
I'm wondering why have you chosen the DLT technology for your product?
It's interesting. We call it blockchain. It's called DLT among central banks. We see a lot of financial applications and services that are being built in this crypto world, which is very interesting, very innovative. The new business models, the way you do trade finance, the way you do peer-to-peer lending, the way you do margin trading, and we're seeing now the tokenization of assets and so on. So if you want to be a part of that, you have to provide the payment rail in that form, because and we built it on Ethereum, which is a programmable blockchain, and there are many use cases where you need, or it's beneficial for the customer to have a small logic, a part of the service. So that's why we chose the blockchain technology, what you refer to as a DLT.
And is the Riksbank also looking into that, or not at all?
So just let me give we have looked into that as well. And I have to admit, I'm not sure how it is with the pilot, whether that is, whether we have specified whether it should be a simple one ledger or some DLT. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But personally, I have a hard time understanding what's the benefit of having several ledger when you can have one. But
so what's the benefit of having one airline company and compared to many competing? This is about the functionality, this is about business logic, this is about business services and so on.
Come on. The reason why because I think it's another issue, kind of. Having more, let's say we had an E-krona, which was an account-based one, and that was it. And we allowed for the private sector to suggest or to create apps and other technologies. That would be like, and different providers. That would be like having different airlines. But if we were to issue an E-krona and using a distributed ledger, that would not be like having several
maybe companies. For anonymity, would that be interesting, or?
Well, that's also a very interesting question. Should it be private or public? In the cryptocurrency world, most of it is public. It's very easy to trace all the transactions. And now you have developed very interesting tools for monitoring transactions, seeing patterns in transactions. It's a part of the AML solutions now. So we are basically using the technology to make surveillance and to comply more efficient, and I think that's beneficial to everyone. To your remark, the Icelandic Central Bank in 2008, one of the things that happened was that the payment system was run by the three banks, and the three banks, they all collapsed. So the danger was that ordinary companies, they could not even pay salaries the next month. Companies that had nothing to do with the failure. That was the real danger in 2008. Why? Because we had one payment system. A digital ledger is basically a payment system. It is about moving numbers between account or addresses, if you will. And if you have if you do it in an orderly way, you can have more than one blockchain. You can have more technologies, and they make the system more, shall we say, anti-fragile. It's basically, if one goes down, the whole system is not going to go down.
Another question to Martijn and Andreas. Is the political debate separated between the parties? I mean, your approaches lie now in the parliament, or you've talked to politicians. Can you divide it into different streams, or is it just a big mess?
So in the Netherlands nowadays, most political parties are interested, and we visited last 2 months, we visited almost all of them, except, I would say, the more right-wing parties. So the progressive parties and the Liberal Party and the Social Liberal Party, the Social Democrats, they are all interested more or less in the same way. But the more to the right, the more conservative they are. And I think that's the thing. So the more conservative they are, the less interested they are. And in my view, that's also very interesting. Young people are interested. So younger member of parliaments, they understand much better what is the importance of technologies. So I think that's maybe the main thing. The younger they are, the more interested they are, and the more they also see the relevance.
I suggest you follow the debate, which I think it will be on Tuesday next week, and it will be broadcast.
Okay. In Swedish?
Far as in Swedish. I'm sorry.
It's difficult then. Yeah.
Let's choose another one. What do we have? Maybe I'm going to schedule that to the next one. Let's see.
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
No, one more then.
Okay. Does anybody have like a pressing, really important question? Because I have still a lot of them, but I have to scroll through them. Klaus.
Censorship.
Censorship?
Yeah.
Censorship by a centralized...
No, by you.
Sorry?
By you.
I'm trying to find very important questions. Yeah.
It's only after the hands and then the questions are coming. We are not so big group. Why don't you ask? I wait later.
Klaus.
Yeah, it was a question to the central bank. Everyone knows there will be a next crisis coming somewhere. And are there scenarios? What should be best done after the next crisis?
Yeah, we are thinking about this the whole time. How can we respond if there is a new crisis? Of course we are. But yeah.
Michael, if Michael wants.
Yes, Michael.
A question to Mr. Eggleston. You were saying this should be left to the private sector, the implementation, etc. But there are some aspects where you need to make a decision, and one of them is seniorage. If the private sector invests in risk-free assets and issues money, it's going to make a spread on this, because there's a convenience yield on monetary assets, and that amounts to a pretty large, potentially private profit. And should that really be captured entirely by the private sector?
I don't quite understand the question. The problem.
So if you issue money that is backed by risk-free securities that have an interest rate of, let's say, 3%, and then you issue money against that,
E-money.
E-money,
Yeah.
that has 1% or 0%.
Zero.
Zero in your case, I guess.
It's by law.
E-money is always zero.
Okay. So who gets the interest? Is the interest difference?
Now the e-money company gets the difference.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that there are monetary issues that can be addressed in this directive. So I would suggest that those issues would be addressed in a new directive, but you build on a very good foundation. Just like any legislation, this is not perfect, but I think we have if you look around the world, we haven't seen a better framework for doing this. And if people are worried that the e-money companies are profiting too much, then I remind you that we have negative interest rates in the euro area, so that's not very profitable. But I think, so all I'm saying that you have a very good framework, but this issue has to be addressed as well.
Cut it off?
Yeah, okay.
We cut it off.
It's time for lunch.